Hello, everyone. Want to get into some material here that I think is very, very important. And I've got a good deal of it, so I'm trying to break this into sections. But what I want to start off with here out of this chapter is a chapter on organizational development. And basically, when it comes to organizational development, we've got to look at some of the very basics to begin with, which is what is org development, why do we do it, and what are some of the things that have to be overcome. So that's why you see there the title, Sacred Cows, what are they, and how do we deal with them? I just tell you this, and I just put the whole thing up there. In a lot of organizations, change occurs for a lot of reasons, okay? And change can take on a lot of different forms if we've got to make a change within a business. Okay, now why do we have to do that? You see, there are some of the reasons why, including what we call downsizing. uh, Basically, that can be cutting personnel. They call it right sizing. I've heard that term used before. Part of it, we may need to reorganize how a business is structured, add people to one department, create another department, decrease still another department, or just outright diminish, something else. We also can have times where we're going to start a team format to things, and so that requires some changes. There are also what we call government rules and regulations. I have been with an organization that turned around at one time, and a lot of their funding came from the federal government. And when this started up, they found themselves in a situation where they had to change how they do things completely because of governmental regulations. You might also make changes because you've got new leadership and that's what they want, or you downright have new personnel. So there's a lot of reasons why we have to change an organization, update an organization, make modifications. And really, one of the first steps to organizational change is what is sometimes referred to as the sacred cow hunt. Okay, the sacred cow hunt. As you see there, sacred cows are those things that organizations have done for a long, long time, those practices that have been in place for a long, long time. And they tend not to be very efficient. They tend to lower productivity. They tend to make things take a lot longer. They do not work well. These things called sacred cows. They're sacred. We've done them so long. All right. Some businesses, one of the first things they do is what is called a sacred cow hunt. I like this term. I really, truly do, because what you're doing in one of these sacred cow hunts is that you're trying to rid your business of policies, of practices, of anything that you might do that basically serve no useful purpose. They create work unnecessarily. They take time away from your job. Sometimes they create stress, and sometimes they're just downright inefficient. So when you're going to start what I would call a sacred cow hunt, one of the first things you got to do is ask yourself a number of questions. All right. When doing anything, one of the first things you got to ask yourself is, why are we doing this? Okay. Any particular task, any particular policy, why do we do this? Okay. Is there a value that we gain from it? Is there a service that we gain? Does it influence productivity or quality? Now, if the answer is no, it may be something that needs to go. All right. If an organization goes to a great deal of trouble and it serves no purpose, you got to let it go. One of the other ways to look at this and determine if something's of value is to ask yourself, what if it didn't exist? What if it didn't exist? What effect would that have on the company? All right. Some companies have actually turned around and done something I thought was really neat, where they basically have diminished or eliminated certain policies or procedures or paperwork trails, and they want to see if anybody noticed. Okay, anybody noticed? I think your book talks about one of these as well. Got rid of a monthly report that we weren't sure anybody was reading, so the suggestion was, well, just don't print it, and let's see how many people ask for it. And over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, not one single solitary person said anything about it. Not one person turned around and wanted to see where it was at and stuff like that. And it tells you it's not being used. Is it already being done by someone else? Basically, what that means, unnecessary repetition, that kind of thing. Is not necessary. If another department is doing something, do we have to do it? If another individual is doing it, is it necessary for you to have to do it as well? How and when did we start doing something? And that refers to if something could be outdated or no longer relevant, which is always a possibility. And then finally, can it be done better by someone else? Maybe another department is better suited for it. Maybe another individual, maybe another company. You know, if the answer to any of these questions, all right, is no, okay, or in such that it shows unnecessary practices and unnecessary policies, then they've got to go. You've got to really ask yourself these. And if you find people struggling to come up with explanations, then they may be just protecting their jobs when in fact it's not the case. So let's talk about some of these sacred cows. And there are different types of sacred cows, all right? And that's what I want to get into. One of them that you see there is called a paper cow. And another word for a paper cow is just unnecessary, typically unnecessary paperwork. Any forms, any reports that cost a company money, they cost a company time. It takes time to prepare them. It takes time to distribute them. You know, these are paper cows. And there are organizations that have paper trails that serve absolutely no purpose. And that's what we're here to talk about. Okay. So you got to sort of ask yourself the following question. You know, does the paperwork and forms that you are requiring really increase productivity, make the business more efficient? If the answer is no, okay, all right, then it probably needs to go. If it's sometimes, then we need to revise it to make it better. Ask if anyone reads a particular form when distributed. Like I said, one way of getting around that is just simply asking people at a meeting or asking around. Or as I said earlier, will anybody notice if it's not distributed? Okay, is a good sign. Like I said, companies have actually tried this and found that since they didn't send out a report, nobody noticed and nobody complained. Um, it's a sign of an unnecessary report. It really is. Do forms have indicate information that's not necessary? And I've actually seen this. Your author talks about it, and some businesses do this. They have forms that have no purpose to them, okay? None whatsoever. And the question is there's information that nobody uses, there's things on it nobody needs. It's not necessary. These are examples of what we call a paper cow. Another one is what we call a meeting cow. This involves actually decreasing the number of meetings, you know, or if you don't decrease the number of meetings, decrease the length of meetings. I have seen people that will make excuses not to attend a meeting because it can run 2-3 hours and not very much is done. It gets out of control. All right. You really got to ask yourself with a meeting cow, how much of a meeting is spent on business versus socializing. And I guarantee you that a lot of people that call meetings will tell you that most of it's business and very little is socializing. And yet, sometimes when you are at those meetings, you'll be shocked by the amount of socializing that goes on. If you take a lot of that excess socializing out, a meeting would be a lot shorter. And I dare ask, is it really necessary at all? Okay, there are people in businesses that justify their worth by having meetings. All right, is that really necessary at all? You've got to take that into consideration. Okay, so these are the questions you can ask yourself, and this is an interesting approach. This is what I call a cost benefit analysis. All right, to figure some of this out. And by the way, you see my my little thing that I grabbed there. We'll continue having lots of meetings until we finding out why no work is done. Well, no work's done because people are having meetings. Okay, here's some things you really got to ask yourself. All right, what's the cost of the meeting? What is the cost of the meeting? You know, 1 hour's salary from each employee who's in attendance. That's safe to say. Possibly the cost of using up the meeting room may not physically cost your department. Sometimes it does. If you're going to have food, if you're going to have drinks, if you're going to offer lunch, refreshments, how much is that? And then you just got to ask yourself, will all of these costs exceed, okay, the potential benefits? Because if the costs do exceed the potential benefits, then it's not necessary. All right. You know, when people are forced to consider the benefits against cost, you'd be surprised how many meetings are not held. I'll say that again. When you tell an employee, tell me how much all this is going to cost, you ask them to break this down. All right. What is it going to cost? What are we going to gain? There are employees that will just forego their meeting and decide not to have it because it's not worth the time. It really truly isn't. So meeting cows. We also speak of what are speed cows. Okay. And speed cows involve unnecessary deadlines. You know, does something really need to be due by tomorrow? Does it really need to be due by this coming Friday? Okay. And things like that. And one of the things that's very frustrating with any business is when a person has or department has a deadline, they get everything turned in by a certain deadline, and then in the process of doing so, it sits on somebody else's desk for a day or several days or a week or several weeks or even longer. And that's very frustrating, okay? Because if it sits on someone else's desk after you rush to get it done, you've stressed people out. You've stressed them out to get it done by a deadline. A lot of things don't get done well, all right? The quality of everything is less, and then it just sits there, all right? So you've got to be very careful about that. Having deadlines are important, but unnecessary deadlines, definitely not important. And then finally, some other methods to eliminating sacred cows that I want to mention here. You got to turn around and do this from sort of a child's perspective when it comes to asking yourself if something is a sacred cow that needs to go. Think like a beginner. Learn to ask why. When people say we have to have this, why? This is necessary. Why? Why do we have to have this? Why do we have to do this? Because sometimes the best answer people can give you is it just is. And that's a sign that maybe something is a sacred cow. It needs to go. If you don't understand something, okay, ask why it's done. You might be surprised how many people wonder the exact same thing. So definitely worth keeping in mind. If it's not broken, still consider fixing it. And by that, I mean at least make it better. We have to constantly be looking for ways to improve on things, okay? For example, even though, say, our company is making a profit, are there new markets we can get into? You don't want to turn around and sit on your laurels and say, hey, we're turning a profit. Why should we mess with all that? Everything's good. If the company's making a profit, are there new products that we can introduce? It's not enough just to say to oneself, it's not broken, don't fix it. Hey, I suggest making it better, and people suggest making it better. You're constantly trying to be more efficient with things, all right? That's what I'm talking about, being more efficient. Don't play by everyone else's rules. I dare you to be innovative, all right? I dare you to find new and innovative way of doing things that keeps your competition, that your competition is not doing, excuse me. Because if you try things that your competition is not doing, then you are far ahead of the game. You really, truly are. Don't settle for just being at the top. Always strive to be better. And then finally, this is a big one. Some companies turn around and basically make it clear they're not happy with the mistakes that are made. But if you get punished, in essence, or chastised because you tried something and it failed, then there's no initiative or desire to do something again. Instead of punishing mistakes, I really do suggest you reward initiative, okay? People aren't going to suggest things if a company punishes mistakes or failures. But if you reward people for the effort, the true blue effort, they'll keep trying. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that someone does a half-hearted job and you say, hey, that's great, and leave it at that. But basically, you have to put forth a mentality that we're going to stand by this. That's what it's all about. Okay, folks, that's one of the first of many lectures. So look it over and expect a quiz coming soon. Thanks a whole bunch. Take care.